In June 1999, my dad passed away following a lengthy illness. And for his funeral, Mom and I had asked my cousin Ronaldine, goes by Ronnie now, but Ronaldine to us, we had asked my cousin Ronald to come sing a few of Dad's favorite old-time gospel hymns. My cousin Ronald is a tremendously gifted musician. And I remember as a kid, my dad loved to just sit and listen to him play his guitar and sing. Well, since Ronald would be driving up that morning from the Texas coast and the funeral was there in Arlington, Mom and I wanted to express our appreciation to him by getting him a gift. And as he was and is still a Baptist minister, we decided to buy him something from James Avery, of course. And while we were there, I showed my mom this Fishers of Men bracelet that I'd been wanting. And as I remember, she ended up buying it for me in memory of my dad. And it seemed like a fitting tribute to him, as my dad was a man who loved to fish. Every weekend, if he wasn't on the golf course, he was fishing. And honestly, some of my best childhood memories of him have to do with all-night fishing trips, either on a barge at Lake Whitney or the shores of what was then the TPL Lake out in Waco, or just wherever, Lake Worth and Fort Worth, wherever we might end up. Some of my best memories were of those all-night fishing trips with my dad. So it's a bracelet that's very special to me. It's one that I cherish and one that I very rarely take off. Well, fast forward, if you will, 15 years to June 2015. The Central Texas Annual Conference is meeting in South Lake at White's Chapel United Methodist Church, by far our conference's largest congregation. One day on our lunch break, I accompanied some friends and colleagues to a nearby restaurant. You could eat from the food trucks they provided, or you could go have a sit-down meal with your friends and enjoy it a little more. Anyway, it was at some point during that meal that I looked down and I realized that my bracelet was gone. Now, I knew I had it on earlier that day, or at least I was fairly sure I did, and again, I never take it off. And I was heartsick. I had lost it, and I had no clue as to when or where. And I was upset, not so much because it would cost me upwards of $300 to replace it, but because it has a lot of sentimental value to me. Because it was, in a sense, the last gift my dad gave me from Mom. And it reminds me of some of the things that I loved most about him. Yes, I could buy another one if I were to choose to do so. But even then, it wouldn't be the same. It wouldn't have the same memory as that particular bracelet. So I immediately started digging through my purse, thinking maybe that I'd reached my hand in to get my wallet out, and it had caught and fallen off there. That didn't work. So I went to the restroom at the restaurant where we were eating. I looked there. No, I hadn't lost it there. I looked all around the table. I traced my path back out to the car. I looked through the car. You know, it's 100+ degrees. It's June in Texas. And, but it was nowhere to be found. And I was just sick. I was sick to my stomach. I was just so disappointed, and I was really hurt. On the way back to the church to take up that afternoon session of annual conference, one of my friends said, why don't you just stop and talk to the women that are there in the greeters area and see if maybe somebody found it at the church and turned it in. And I was like, oh yeah, right, this is like this humongous, and this church makes First Methodist Round Rock look small. And I'm like, right, even if somebody found it, who knows? I guess I'm not as trusting as I should be. But anyway, so I thought, okay, I'll stop, and then maybe if they haven't found it, I'll leave my name and my telephone number, and if somebody does find it and turn it in, just in case, you know, I'll do that. So I walked up to one of this nice women from Whitechapel, and I said, you know, I lost a bracelet. And she just lit up. And I'm like, what? She said, someone found one this morning. It had broken and apparently fallen off, and they brought it and turned it in. Just go over to our lost and found, and you can claim it. And I was like, oh, man. I mean, I think it's so lucky. What are the odds, right? And so, I mean, something treasured, something I treasured had been lost. And now I found it, and I can't even begin to explain to you the joy I felt in that moment. One of this morning's passages from Luke, we read 2 of the 3 parables that Jesus told about things that had been lost, but now were found. And while these parables, like all parables of Jesus, are multi-layered and contain numerous lessons from which we can learn, I'd like to suggest to you that these stories are first and foremost about joy. Yes, I could focus on the issue of being lost, or even on the issue of being found, or I could focus on the disgruntled, scribes and Pharisees whose grumblings about Jesus and who he hung out with were the reason these parables were told to begin with. But I really think that the overarching theme of these stories and the one that follows next week has to do with the tremendous joy God feels each time one of God's children finds their way back to the one who created them. In these 10 short verses, we hear about it twice. In verse 7, Jesus says, I tell you, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who changes both heart and life than over 99 righteous people, or people who think they're righteous, who have no need to change. And then again in verse 10, he repeats pretty much the same thing. In the same way, I tell you, joy breaks out in the presence of God's angels over one sinner who changes both heart and life. Joy. Pure, unadulterated joy. That's God's reaction any time any one of us finds our way into or back into a relationship with the God who created us. These stories are about the sheer joy God experiences anytime we choose abundant life with God over life without God, or when we live into the potential with which God created each of us. Anytime we choose God over ourselves and put others first, ahead of ourselves. Anytime we do any of those things that lead to abundant life, God feels immeasurable, immense, uncontainable joy. Yet somehow, the scribes and the Pharisees didn't seem to understand that. For them, it was all about following the rules, about behaving a certain way, about whom one should and shouldn't associate with. And from where I stand, these stories have less to do with who's lost or who's not following the rules, and everything to do with who God is. They have to do with the character of God, the one who created us, the God who never stops seeking us out, who never gives up trying to draw us into or back into soul. You see, I don't believe that our God is an angry or punitive God who punishes us when we go astray. Instead, ours is a merciful, loving, grace-filled God who never gives up, who never quits searching for us, who finds abundant joy each and every time one of us finds our way home. God is that good shepherd who leaves behind the 99 to go out and find that one lost sheep. God is the woman who turns her house upside down searching for the one lost coin rather than focusing on the 9 she still possesses. The story is about who God is, the nature of God, and the relationship God desires with each of us. And it's also a model of how we as followers of the Christ are called to be. Never satisfied, always seeking, reaching out to those who have no relationship with God, to those who are looking for that something more in life, and even to those who may not know they're looking at all. I have a confession to make. Y'all know I'm not always the nicest person. Y'all have seen that, I'm sure, and you've certainly heard about it. This afternoon, I have to leave to head back up to that same church in Southlake, White's Chapel, for an all-day evangelism summit tomorrow. And I have to say, I haven't had a very positive attitude about attending this evangelism summit. Mostly because it's one of those command performances where they tell you that you have the option of not going, but then turn around and really tell you that you don't. And I don't like that. Don't tell me what to do. You know, I'm just enough of a rebel that you don't tell me I have to go to an optional seminar. But anyway, so that's part of it. And part of it has to do with the theology of some of the people who are the presenters for the day. They are not exactly where I am on the theological spectrum. And so, you know, I'm sitting there with my haughty attitude thinking, well, seriously, what are they going to teach me? I mean, I'm just going to take my, my iPhone that goes straight to my Bluetooth hearing aids and play music and drown them out. I mean, honestly, I thought these things. I mean, I know it's not flattering, but that's who I am. You don't laugh. I mean, it's true. And then I started reading this passage. And it's like, duh. I always love it when I'm trying to prepare a sermon for you, and it ends up stomping all over my toes. Well, that's what happened this week with this sermon. Joy. Joy. God feels joy whenever one of the lost are found. Well, duh, what's evangelism about? Whether I agree with the theological perspective of those who are presenting or not, whether I have to go or it's voluntary, it's really not the point, is it? Because we all know that if one goes into any situation with an open heart and an open mind, that there's always something to be gleaned. And I know that as a pastor of this church, this last 12 to 14 years, however long it's been, one of the things that has always brought me the greatest joy is when some of you have found journey of faith after being away from church, sometimes for many, many years, and because of the nature of who we are, and the love and the joy we share, and the restrictions we don't place on people, you've come back to God. Not that you ever left God, but you've come back to the church and a structured relationship with God. And I know that that is what has kept me going as a pastor all these years, is that joy I feel. So can you imagine the joy God feels when each of us finds our way back into that full relationship with the one who created us. And so I'm going tomorrow with a little bit better attitude than I started out with. And I'm going to listen for what I might learn that then can be translated to what we might learn about reaching out and sharing with others in our community the love and the mercy and the grace of God we've come to know through journey of faith. You know, and honestly, I've gotten to where I'm not as passionate about that as I once was. And I think we all go through cycles of ups and downs. And I think we as a church go through cycles of ups and downs. But I think we need to rekindle that passion of sharing with other people the specialness that we found here. That relationship with God that makes life more meaningful than it is without that relationship. You know, in one form or another, for the past 8 years, our Bishop Lowry, has been asking us clergy and also our laity 3 basic questions that, when answered, I think help define the mission and purpose we have as a church. Why do people need Jesus? Why do people need the church? And why do people need this particular church? And sometimes it's good to go back and look at those questions and ask them of ourselves again. It's good for me. And they sound simple, but I don't know about you, but I find them harder to answer than I would like to. Why do people need Jesus? Why do they need a church? And why do they need this particular church? I think one of the challenges of a broader, more progressive understanding of the gospel is this whole notion of evangelism. As a young adult struggling to define my faith, I came to believe that Jesus wasn't necessarily the only way to God, that God could be found in other religions, that there was legitimacy in the paths found by good Jews and Muslims or Hindus or Buddhists. And I came to believe that in the end we all worship the same God, but that we come to a belief in God in differing ways, oftentimes dictated by the culture in which we live or are born. What troubled me, however, was Jesus' commandment to go into the world making disciples and baptizing in his name. And I remember going to my college pastor, the pastor at my church when I was in college, Don Pocket, and I said, you know, Don, I believe that God can be found in many different ways, and that's great, but and I think you believe that too, but if that's true, then why do we bother evangelizing? And I'll never forget what he said. He said, we evangelize because even though we may believe that God can be found through the Buddha, or through Islam, through Hinduism, through other world religions, we believe that Christianity offers the most complete understanding of God because of the person of Jesus and his teachings. And so, when I talk about evangelism, I'm not talking about going out and beating up people who have found a path to God. Because if they found a path to God, even though it may be different than ours, they're on the right track. But there's lots of people. There are a lot of people in this community. More and more every day. The studies are showing it. More and more. The biggest segment of our society in terms of religion are what are called the nuns. Used to be it was the spiritual but not religious. We're spiritual but we just don't like the church. But now, the biggest segment of our population in the United States are what researchers call the nuns. They're people who have no religious affiliation, and they don't even consider themselves spiritual anymore. It's not just spiritual but not religious, but nuns. And I got to believe that there are them like us, that they like us, are searching for some of the same meaning that we come here looking for. Some of the same answers to some of the same questions. And if we have a place that we think provides some of that, and has help meet that need in us, then isn't it our responsibility to share it with those nuns? Again, I'm not talking about going and recruiting somebody from the church down the road, or even the mosque down the road, or the temple down the road. I'm talking about going and sharing naturally out of the joy God has placed in your heart. That there's a place where they're accepted, where they can come and ask those tough questions of faith, where they can come and be who they are and love who they want to love, and that we won't judge. That there's a place called Journey of Faith, and if they don't have a place to go, then we'd like them to come and be a part of us. Our job is to help God find others who, like us, need to be found by the unconditional love of a gracious and ever-seeking and always welcoming God. I think that's the purpose of the church. We're to be God's hands and feet in our world. We're to help others see and experience the love of God that we ourselves have come to know. For even with all our shortcomings, we are Christ's body in this world. The means by which God offers that hope and healing, and through which God gives meaning and direction to those who are lost. It is in and through the community of faith that God's love becomes real, that it becomes tangible, that it goes from being an abstract notion to a flesh and blood reality that we can touch and see and feel. In other words, we, the church, are for many people God with skin on. And when we started Journey of Faith, one of our stated goals was to be a church that would reach out to what I call the de-church. Those who had a bad experience with the church in the past and were thus suspicious of organized religion as a whole. That goal remains a part of our DNA. And so I would hope that we would continue to work hard to embody the characteristics of unconditional love and acceptance that Jesus lived and taught. And it's why I think people need this particular church. Yeah, I know we can't be all things to all people. But maybe we can be a place for those who have felt ostracized by the church to come and experience God's grace and develop that life-giving relationship with the God who is forever seeking them through Jesus the Christ and through his body on earth, this fellowship we call the church. And I believe that each time one of God's children comes to know and experience that unconditional love of God, whether it's here or somewhere else, that there is